Were you all taken on October 6th?
Yes.
So this was hell, huh?
It's a miracle.
And you're living?
Yes.
I was kidnapped on 7 October. My wife and my 2 daughters been murdered on the same day. I was held in captivity for 491 days. I've been suffered there from starvation, violence, and humiliations daily. One time, they broke in my ribs, and it was so hurt that I couldn't breathe for 1 month. Thanks to President Trump, I'm a free man. I can hug my mother again. I can hug my brothers and sisters.
My little brother, it's still in there.
My family and I myself, we believe you've been sent by God to release them.
We think they could get out thanks to you.
Yes.
We are here because of you.
We're alive and free people because of you. Thank you very much.
Wow.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much.
That's
We want
unbelievable. What a
our
story. I've
friends,
never had anything like
our
this.
families.
I mean, I've saved a lot of people, but I've never seen anything like this where you lived under those conditions. Horrible stories. Not even believable.
Thank you.
We'll get them out.
That clip you just watched shows a delegation of Israeli hostages in the Oval Office last week, meeting with President Trump. All had been held captive by Hamas. Most were released in the recent deal. Being received in the Oval Office, especially for these people, was not just an honor, but also of critical importance. They have left behind in Hamas captivity 59 others, and each one of these former hostages has dedicated their freedom to ensuring that every hostage is released as soon as possible. I speak in this episode with Moshe Lavi, one of many quiet heroes who worked so hard to ensure that this extraordinary meeting could come together. His sister, Lishay Miran Lavi, is the mother of 2 little girls, Romy and Alma. Their father, Lishay's husband, Omri Miran, was taken hostage by Hamas on October 7th, 2023. Moshe has devoted himself to doing everything possible to save Omri and all of the hostages. I spoke with him on Friday afternoon, following what had been a very difficult week. He had spent it with the hostages, beginning with their reception by President Trump. To a person, each freed hostage thanked President Trump profoundly. Among them was 20-year-old Naama Levy, an IDF soldier who had just finished training and been on the Nahal Oz IDF base for only 2 days before the Hamas attack. Periodically, during her captivity, Naama was able to hear the radio or watch television, Al Jazeera in Arabic, of course, which she learned while in captivity. Naama told President Trump that when the young women with whom she was held heard of his election, their spirits lifted. They believed that he had the power and will to fight for their release. And he did. That sentiment was expressed in turn by each hostage in the room. At the end of this interview with Moshe, I will provide a short update on where things are as of 1 p.m. Sunday afternoon in Israel when I'm recording this. A lot goes down here in 36 hours. Moshe is one of a small group of people who works directly with leadership in the West, including President Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff. And Moshe works with these people to bring every hostage home now. He is very low-key, but he's in the room doing the work of angels, one of many unsung heroes. I'm Vivian Bercovici, former Canadian ambassador to Israel. Please stay with us. Friday, March 7th, 4:15 p.m. in Israel, 9:15 a.m. in New York, where you are, Moshe Lavi. Thank you so much for speaking to State of Tel Aviv today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Good to see you again. We last met in person, actually, in Tel Aviv, the end of December. But I'm sorry we're meeting again, and particularly in these circumstances.
Yeah, it's been a few months since we met. A lot has changed for our cause, but not a lot has changed for our specific family, sadly.
Yes, and we're going to talk about that in just a moment. What I want to start with, Moshe, is the extraordinary meeting that took place just a few days ago, I believe it was on Tuesday, in the Oval Office with a group of recently released hostages, Israeli hostages who are in Hamas captivity for more or less 500 days, for the President of the United States to invite into the Oval Office the group of hostages released that we just saw on the screen. How did that come about, Moshe?
Yeah, it was an incredible and extraordinary event on Wednesday. We, as the Hostage and Missing Families Forum, decided that we're going to take a gamble and aim as high as possible in order to ensure that the hostage crisis remains front and center in the US, where many of the decisions are being made. And so we started discussing this idea a few weeks ago. We also have a partner with us, Hostage Aid Worldwide, another NGO that has been in the discussions. And we tried and see who among the recently released hostages would be willing and is mentally and physically able to come to the US. We didn't pressure anybody because we understood that this is a difficult task, but so many of them said once the idea floated, I want to go to DC and to do everything I can to bring home my brothers and sisters in captivity. Many of them spend time with hostages that are still being held captive. Some of them have family members there, like Yahir Orn, whose brother Eitan is still held captive. And we discussed this with several members of the administration over the past few weeks. And luckily, it worked out. There were moments that it felt like it's not going to work out because a lot happened in DC this week. There was the State of the Union on Tuesday, an annual event to which we managed to bring in several hostage families and release hostages. There were a lot of discussions about the hostage deal that entered an unknown terrain this week, where there is no official ceasefire anymore. There are no more exchanges, but also the war has not resumed yet. And so there were a lot of discussions between the president, his special envoy Witkoff, Mike Waltz, the national security advisor. Adam Boehler was in the region this week and returned to DC. And so we had to navigate this, and it worked out. I'm so happy for me to see those incredible heroes getting the honor of meeting the president and sharing their stories and calling him to keep doing everything he can to bring about the release of the hostages. I was giving strength that I can keep advocating for Omri, that I could see in my eyes Omri, because they were in his shoes only a few weeks ago. And so it was a very emotional week. And I'm happy that our incredible advocacy work behind the scenes ended up with the task we had for this week, whether with the president, with them meeting senators in the Senate yesterday, and in the State Department, there was an event as well. And of course, the State of the Union, everything worked out. But the grand mission is still on hold, and that is to bring home the remaining 59 hostages.
And I want to speak about your very direct connection to the grand mission. And one of those remaining hostages, of course, your brother-in-law, Omri Miran. I just want to sort of talk a little more, if that's okay, about the event in the White House and the attention that President Trump has given to this issue. Because, we all recall on that beautiful and also horrible day when Eli Sharabi or Levi and Ohad Ben Ami were taken to that grotesque stage in Gaza and used for such ugly propaganda purposes. But what really shocked us was their appearance. They, as President Trump said at the time, looked like they just came out of a concentration camp. And he kept saying it. He was clearly very moved, in particular, by Eli Sharabi. He kept mentioning him. And Eli Sharabi, of course, was in that room, in the Oval Office, and he spoke very movingly. And I have to say, there were some hostages who've been out just a touch longer who I was not as surprised to see there. But Eli, he still looks so frail. And the strength that that man exudes is incredible. Am I reading that right? Is there some kind of, is your sense that there is some kind of special connection that the president might have felt towards this particular individual?
I think the president felt a connection to everyone there, but definitely seen Ellie. And I admire this man so much. I had the privilege to speak with him this week, to hug him, to cry with him, to know the person behind the poster. And it gave me so much strength. This man who has been through hell and managed to get back to earth and join our fight immediately. And just so you know, on Wednesday night, he flew to the UK and he met the Prime Minister there this morning, Keir Starmer. His late wife, who was murdered brutally, was a British citizen. So this man who was chained and starved and tortured only up to a few weeks ago has met the President of the United States, the British Prime Minister, in a span of a few days, and made sure to call upon them to hold accountable their accomplices, Hamas, and their sponsors, but also to prioritize bringing home the hostages above any other mission. For him, he said to me, this is my life mission, to make sure everyone is still there, is out, including his brother Yossi, who was brutally taken and killed in captivity. Incredible man, a true superhero. So much strength and calmness. And I can't imagine what he has in his mind, but I know how committed he is now to bring home everyone.
He also, I have to mention, did an extraordinary interview that aired just over a week ago on Uvda, which is Israel's equivalent of 60 Minutes. It was a full 1 hour interview, and I will post the link to that with English subtitles in the notes to this program. I think the whole country watched it and was just...
The whole country watched it, and we made sure that the key moments are being translated and sent immediately. Relevant stakeholders in the negotiations. So they saw it immediately, and I think it made an impact that led to the meetings this week in DC, and hopefully will lead to an agreement to release all the hostages.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but there was a 5-minute clip that was released immediately, and that President Trump saw, and that's when he was apparently, I want to meet this guy. I want to meet these people. And I remember on Sunday reading that it was going to be Eli Sharabi and 2 others, and then the next thing you know, you've got a whole room full. So kudos to you too, the quiet worker bee behind the scenes who's tirelessly pulling all of these very complicated logistics together and really accomplishing extraordinary work. But let's talk about Omri. Omri is 47 years old. He is the husband to your sister, Lishay, who I've also met. And I'll also post the interview I've done with her. They are the parents of 2 beautiful little girls, Ronnie and Alma. And I can't begin to try to understand, never mind explain, what they are suffering. Lishay tried to do that. We spoke about that. I spoke with you about that in December. You made some beautiful remarks recently at a conference, the CPAC conference in the States. And I'm going to show the whole clip. But one part, you just stole my heart when you said that right away, when Lishay understood that Omri was hostage, because that wasn't clear immediately. And you said, what do you need me to do? What can I do? And she said, I need you to be my warrior. I need you to be my warrior out there. And I can't imagine a more fierce in the best way and loyal and brilliant warrior. You've been an incredible advocate, not just for Omri and your sister and those little girls, but for all of them. Tell us what you know about Omri right now in this kind of horrible vacuum in which we find ourselves.
Yeah, certainly. This week has been very emotional for me, so I'm not in the best state of mind. Just because seeing those freed hostages home made me so happy, but also made me realize this could be Omri, but it's not Omri yet. What we know of Omri is only up to July 24th. One of the recently released hostages shared that they spent time with them in the tunnels and houses. They shared that he's holding up mentally and physically. He's keeping his humor. They did yoga and shiatsu therapy sessions in captivity. He's a shiatsu therapist and he provided incredible support for those with him. But it's been so long since July 24 and we don't know what happened after. We do know he's alive. There's no reason to believe otherwise. And that's the information we're giving by the Israeli authorities, our government, our security apparatus. But we don't have a tangible information about his whereabouts or his current condition. We think at times of the worst, we think at times of the best, and we hope we can get him out as soon as possible. We try and emphasize that Omri, 47 years old, like you said, a father to 2 daughters, he's as humanitarian as any person who was released in phase 1, just like all the rest of the hostages who remained behind. And so the government, our government, and all the other relevant stakeholders in the negotiations need to understand that they need to prioritize this in order to ensure my nieces, Ronnie and Alma, have a father again, that my sister, Lishay, has a husband again. And that's our messaging about Omri and about every person, every hostage who is still held captive. Those who are alive so that they can rehabilitate and reunify with their families, and those who were murdered so that their family could close a chapter in their lives, in their journey, a difficult chapter, a tragic chapter like we've seen the past few weeks of burial of hostages who return in coffins, but a closure of a sort nonetheless. And that's going to be our message until everyone is out. And of course, we try and go to DC and to other places around the world. My sister was in Geneva this week at the UN. We try and go there to make sure they understand there are human beings behind the posters, there are stories behind those posters, and that every policy decision they make needs to have these people in mind for whatever they decide. That they have to have that image of them and the story of every hostage in mind.
It's so critically important, as you say, that you and those you are leading on this very difficult journey are unrelenting in the pressure and in maintaining awareness. But getting the attention of the President of the United States in the way that you have is really significant and has, in my view, resulted in the movement we have seen. We know that there are 59 hostages remaining in Hamas captivity, and there has been discussion with respect to the number who might be alive, the number who may have been murdered in captivity, because I consider anyone who dies in captivity to have been murdered. But I know you feel very strongly that until we know otherwise, we are saving every single one, and we are assuming that they're alive. Is that correct?
Yes, we're saving every single one, and we ensure that every family has the closure it needs to have. Um, there are families who know or receive an almost 100% assurance that sadly their loved ones were murdered. But until they see it in their own eyes, until they have that closure, they will not be able to recover.
Moshe, I want to focus now on where we're at today, because we're in a very precarious, amorphous vacuum. We're in this very challenging period where the ceasefire ended 1 week ago, and there was some hope for a few days that perhaps Steve Witkoff, President Trump's special envoy, might be able to work with Qatar and Egypt to convince Hamas to continue to release hostages. And that hope has faded. And it's kind of hard to keep track, as you know, sometimes of who said what first. And it actually doesn't matter anymore, because here we are. And there is no program, no plan for the release of hostages.
There are ongoing discussions that the public does not to be privy to. The discussions never ended. Everyone is working on it 24/7. The Americans are in the region, even if Mr. Witkoff himself is not there. And their negotiations are ongoing with all the stakeholders. And there is a reason why the war has not resumed yet. And we are hopeful that we'll be able to have a breakthrough.
We don't see any movement publicly, right? It's just everything's gone quiet. But quite right, what we do see is that war has not resumed, in spite of a lot of saber rattling. The general public has information and has been told that Adam Bowler was in Qatar.
Adam Bowler is the special president envoy for hostage affairs, working parallel to Mr. Witkoff, and together with him. He was in the region. He's back in DC, and yesterday he gave a statement in the State Department in a special event that was held with families of hostages, with one released hostage, Noah Gamani, and with families of other hostages, American hostages, who were held captive in places like Afghanistan. And the statement was that they are negotiating and they're working behind the scenes, even though at times different stakeholders, including the Israeli government, are unhappy with the moves they have taken. And President Trump addressed it yesterday in a press conference when he admitted that the U.S. is talking directly to Hamas, not because they recognize Hamas as a viable organization to rule Gaza in the post-war reality, but because that's the way to bring home the hostages. And so a lot has been going on. Different stakeholders are talking to each other. And of course, there was also the Arab proposal that was put forth this week and rejected by the US, and it should be rejected because the most important part of the post-war reality, which is phase 3 of the deal, was not addressed. What are the security arrangements, and how are we ensuring that Hamas are not part of the regime in Gaza? And so they'll have to do more homework. Those homework are so important for the second phase. If people don't understand how connected everything is, and in the meantime, what the U.S. has publicly said they're trying to do is to ensure the phase 1 is being extended, and that more hostages are going to be released as a show of goodwill from all parties.
So, Moshe, when you speak about the really inextricable connection between phases 2 and 3, so phase 2 would see the rest of the hostages come home, Israel withdraw fully, and then phase 3 would be the reconstruction of the Gaza Strip.
reconstruction, and we should use reconstitution.
Reconstitution, rehabilitation.
Hamas cannot be in power in Gaza.
So I just want to, I mean, this is a very difficult question, and not sure that you'll have the answer, but I'm really interested in hearing your thoughts on this kind of paradox in which we find ourselves, that Hamas, the wisdom is, has no incentive to release all the hostages until they know that they will stay in power and Israel will vacate the strip. Because the hostages are, I'm sorry to put this way, because I don't feel this way, but from Hamas's perspective, the hostages are assets. They are leverage. It gives them a chokehold on Israel. How do you navigate that? But how do we work through that so that these lives are saved and these people are brought home, and then deal with the other stuff after? Because it's different. But Hamas, of course, doesn't see it that way.
Yeah, I generally agree with the notion that we should prioritize the hostages and deal with the other challenges and address other goals we have in the aftermath. I think that's doable. And that's the message we try to convey to policymakers worldwide, and of course to our own policymakers in Israel. Some get the message, some understand it. And I felt that some understood it yesterday when I spoke to the to senators from the Committee on Armed Services who are working on this issue, among the rest. And some don't. I think the administration understands it. They speak in different voices, and I think it's intentional. It worked until now, and hopefully it will keep working. I wish they could unlink or delink the phases, but I'm not sure it's possible anymore. I don't know how we are going to do it. That's why I'm not an elected official or a military strategist. Well, we need to try and make the hostages a liability to Hamas rather than an asset. And there are just moves in other arenas that are going to influence, in my opinion, the negotiations for the hostages and the path to isolate Hamas. Whether it's in Europe with the conflict there, and whether it's with the Iranian question. And it seems like there is some sort of development there that could help us isolate Hamas if the cards are being played correctly, and then force them to understand that their leaders will have to leave the Gaza Strip to exile, and that a different entity will have to be established that does not include Hamas, and that the hostages must be freed first and foremost. I hope it will work, and and I don't envy those who have the burden of piecing all those pieces together. And I don't think the hostages have necessarily the time to wait.
I mean, especially after what we have seen over the last 7 weeks, I think we should all conclude that they don't. It's now. It's now. Moshe, I'd just like to conclude by asking you, you've had the opportunity and privilege of interacting with Steve Witkoff, President Trump's close personal friend, but also very effective special envoy on this issue and others. I remain firmly of the view that without President Trump and Steve Witkoff, we just would not have seen anyone come home over the last
I agree. And I think try and emphasize that everywhere. We're very grateful for what the previous administration has done, including the first hostage deal in November 23. But at the same time, things were at standstill for such a long time, and there was no pressure applied one way or another throughout a very long time in order to ensure hostages are getting out of hell, being saved from the grips of Hamas. And I think we lost lives as a result of
Absolutely.
that standstill.
We know we did. I mean, I remember, and I'm sure you do very clearly, I was very involved in that May, June, July period of 2024 when we were so close you could taste it. And then it just fell apart. And we know now, because it's been confirmed by a number of officials in Israel, that it was the same deal that was just approved and carried out. We also know that people were murdered since that time. So it's not speculative, and I think it's important that we hold our government officials here to account. But tell us a bit what you can do. Watch Witkoff on TV. He seems very kind of avuncular and warm, and I know that in his interactions with the hostages, he was in Israel for a few days, and no one else, but he just showed up, right? In that there's a room at Kikar Chatufim, Hostage Square in Tel Aviv, where the families can retreat just to kind of have some calm and not have all the buzz around them. And I remember seeing on the news and hearing that Steve Witkoff just showed up. So down to earth, so real. On top of being so effective, you've been in the room with Mr. Witkoff. You've had the opportunity to interact with him. What's he like?
Yeah, I had the privilege to meet him, and many other families had the privilege to meet him and speak with him. He's a warm man. He sees this as his life's mission, and he relates with many of those who lost their loved ones because he lost his son. When we meet policymakers like Mr. Witkoff, we make sure that they hear our family story, that they learn about Omri and the other hostages as human beings, that they know that Omri is a shiatsu and a gardener, that he has two daughters who are calling for him every night and are waiting for him to return, that he has a wife who is fighting for him everywhere she can, and a father who has not shaved his beard since he was taken. We try and make sure they know every piece about their life, every piece about their loved ones waiting for them. And I think that gives them the motivation to keep going, because they know that they're working on a sacred mission to save human beings, to reunify families, and ensure every family has the closure they need. He wants to make this a reality, but he also understands the complexities and tries to navigate it. And he mentions it in every public address, including yesterday outside the White House. I think he's doing everything he can to ensure we can get as many hostages out. So he thinks about the next hostage, but he promised us as well and said it publicly that he also thinks about the last hostage, which means the last one, to ensure that the last one returns to their loved ones. I trust Mr. Witkoff, and like he said many times, and others said, like at CPAC, you mentioned CPAC earlier in this conversation, we were there with other government officials, with President Trump as well, with his Vice President J.D. Vance. They all said, Mr. Witkoff speaks for the president. He's not operating on his own. He doesn't have his own agenda. He's a public servant of the state and the administration. And so we trust that whatever he does or say, he does it on behalf of the president, and it gives us comfort. And it also helps us understand what is going on and interpret the difference between rhetorics at times, aggressive rhetoric, and diplomacy behind the scenes. And that's what I want to see. We have not seen aggressive rhetoric in the past by public officials, whether in the US or in other countries. And that emboldened Hamas and their sponsors. And we have not seen effective diplomacy behind the scenes for a long time. We see it now, and I hope it continues until the last hostage is out. And then we could address the root cause which is Hamas regime, Hezbollah's apparatus in Lebanon, and of course Iran.
The axis of terror, as it has been called by many. Moshe Lavi, thank you so much for taking the time. I know it's been a very difficult week for you, but this is so important, and we really appreciate it. And thank you for the incredible work you're doing. And I hope that the next time I see you, you're celebrating.
I hope so too. Thank you. I
Thank
appreciate the kind.
It has been a very intense 36 hours since I spoke with Moshe late last week. Hamas has released a sign of life video of 21-year-old IDF soldier Matan Angarest. His family approved the release of the video to the public. You can find the link on our website, again, stateoftelaviv.com, in the podcast notes to this episode. Speaking to Israeli journalists since Friday, Matan's mother, Anat, says this is not her son. His eyes and voice are flat. His nose is broken. He is clearly in physical and emotional distress. When pulled from his tank at the Nahal Oz base by Hamas thugs on October 7th, Matan was seriously wounded. It is clear from the video that he cannot move his right arm at all. His face is distorted and seems to be partially paralyzed on one side. There is grave concern as to whether he has mobility in his legs. Matan says he is being treated differently from the other hostages. He is being treated as a warrior, as a soldier, he says. I dare not imagine. Also since Friday, there have been reports that U.S. hostage envoy Adam Bowler met directly with senior Hamas representatives in Doha. This was leaked to the media, as were reports of the reaction of Israel's Minister of Strategic Affairs and Prime Minister Netanyahu's confidant, Ron Dermer. Apparently, Dermer phoned Bowler and expressed his rage. And now, Mr. Witkoff, we learn, is heading to Doha this week as well, a sign that something significant may be up. And an Israeli team is also heading to the Qatari capital. This morning, on Sunday, a new poll was released by the Israel Democracy Institute, an Israeli think tank that is highly regarded by many, myself included, but dismissed as yet another left-wing anti-Bibi institution by others. You decide. A link to the poll released by the IDI is also included in the podcast notes on our website. What the poll purports to demonstrate is that Israelis across the political spectrum are committed to ensuring the release of all hostages now. Let's hope that it comes to pass, because it cannot happen soon enough. Check out our podcast notes for all of the links we mention here, and maybe even a few more. Like us, love us, subscribe, ring the bell, share. Don't be shy. Please support our work however you can. Thanks for being here. Signing off, Vivian Bercovici. We love hearing from you, so please comment on our website, stateoftelaviv.com, or send us a note to hello@stateoftelaviv.com. On behalf of the State of Tel Aviv core team, Yon Zabo, our creative, graphic, visual, and marketing man, Amir White, producer and editor extraordinaire, sound guy, who is also impressively patient with me and my boomer tech deficiencies, and our social media manager who pitches in on everything, Maya Naftalin. Thanks to the team. Thanks to you for being here. We'll be back soon.